Hey friends, the Exiles conference is just a couple days away. If you are listening to this the day of release on the 31st of March, the conference starts this Thursday, March 3rd. And I'm guessing if you don't live in the Minneapolis area, you're probably not going to run out and buy a plane ticket and fly to Minneapolis. Therefore, if you're not already registered live to attend live, you probably will not be able to, except if you do live in the Minneapolis area. I would highly encourage you to check it out. But we do have a live streaming option. So just go to theologyandrod.com and you can see how you can live stream the conference from your living room. My guest today is Dan White Jr., who's a co-founder of the Kineo Center, which is an intentional place for renewal and healing for weary and burned out ministry leaders located in Puerto Rico. If that fits your description, if you feel weary and burned out, I would highly recommend checking out the Kineo Center. The information is in the show notes, and also we do talk about what Dan does through the Kineo Center during this podcast. Dan is also the author of several books, including Love Over Fear, and the co-author of Church as Movement. I always find Dan to be so insightful and wise and humble when it comes to questions surrounding the intersection of culture, politics, and the church. He's been on the podcast before, so please welcome back to the show the one and only Dan White Jr. Dan White Jr. This is long overdue, man. We were talking for a while offline, and I'm like, dude, I think we need to hit record at some point. So,
yeah. Absolutely.
Real quick, who are you? What do you do? And then let's jump into our conversation.
Dan White Jr. Obviously, I live in Puerto Rico. I helped start with my wife a healing and discipleship and development center on the east coast of Puerto Rico. So we help nonprofit leaders as well as ministry leaders walk through a 1-week experience in facing their pain, their exhaustion, their ego, and move towards healing, renewal practices. It's really a deep kind of immersive deconstruction and reconstruction when it comes to your personhood and who you think you are in the world. So we've been doing that for about 4 years, and we've had a little over 500 men and women come through from 14 different denominations. So
wow.
I don't know if that's just a testament to us, but I think there's a groundswell of people who are on the brink or borderline in a place of burnout and trying to figure out, how do I still follow Jesus? How do I deal with these wounds and this shame and anger and fear that I'm feeling without it killing me? And so it's been really fun to be on the front lines of that in the last 5 years. Prior to that, and I still do some of this work, but I just help people start new communities outside of traditional models of church. Some call it missional church, but it's really just helping to help planters as well as existing churches rethink discipleship, community, neighborhood, leadership, so that it is less top-down and more decentralized and movemental. So I do that with the V3 movement, and that's kind of a passion project for me the last 15 years or so. Yeah, and then I've been married 26 years, and two little fellas. One's not so little; he's 20, and then I have a little 6-year-old who's 8-year-old. Sorry, not 6, 8-year-old who's
time flies
running around.
Did you coin the phrase the church industrial complex? You're the first one I heard it from. Did you get that from somebody else? Or?
I stole it off of Eisenhower. He didn't.
Sure.
You know, President Eisenhower, the military industrial complex, and as J.R. Woodward and I were starting to build training, there was always the question, like, what are we talking about? Just the church? And I'm like, no, it's not the church. It's an industrialized version of the church that is always consolidating more resources, more power, more attention. It's an industrial complex, and so that's where the term came from. Just kind of trying to imagine what it is we were wrestling with. So church industrial complex is where that came, and since then I've seen it, used in all kinds of spaces now. And
you were in that
because
you were in that complex for over a decade, right, or a couple decades?
Yeah. I was leading and teaching and doing ministry in specifically a mega church, but prior to that, even a kind of a mid-level church. And it wasn't necessarily about size; it was the way that we embodied ministry was really come and consume our great preaching, our great worship, our great programs. And if you partake in these things, you will be changed. And I think I got pretty good at mastering that way of doing ministry.
Hmm.
My first book, Subterranean, which is now almost 15 years old, is like my memoir of struggling with
Hmm.
being in that environment, but as well as my own ego that actually enjoyed that environment, and how I had to go through a bit of a detox of who I was if I wasn't going to be leading from that position of power and
Hmm.
influence. So, yeah,
I mean, last time you were on, I don't know, what, 3 years ago, maybe.
yeah,
We talked all about that. So I'll try to go back and find an episode if someone wants to go listen to that, because it's tempting. I wanted, every time you talk about it, I'm like, oh, let's talk about that. But I brought you on this time to talk about. Well, I originally reached out because, you know what it was? You reached out to me and you said, "Man, you should do a podcast on the endemic, epidemic of
epidemic.
loneliness." Epidemic of
Mm,
loneliness. And I said, sure, you
mm,
want to be the one to come on and talk about it? But
okay.
then also, we're talking offline. You just have such a, I think, healthy view of some of the problems of falling into this just political polarization. Like, I,
Mm,
there's I mean, I hate to say there's like few people I think that I resonate with in
mm,
terms of how they view the political scene. You're one of them. Every time I read your tweets and everything, I'm like, oh my gosh, I could
mm,
not have said this any better, you know? Um,
mm,
so we're talking offline just so people know, like, I'm like, dude, I want to
yeah,
talk about both these, but I'm like, I think they're kind of related a little bit too. Why don't we start
yeah,
with the epidemic of loneliness? Let's start there.
yeah.
Let's start there. And I'm sure the other stuff will arise rise to the
Yeah,
surface
I
too.
mean,
Are we going
absolutely.
through an epidemic of loneliness? Is this unique? And if so, why? What's causing it?
Right. Yeah. So the loneliness being leading at Kineo Center and helping to facilitate um, transformation at people's most painful moments in life. Um, we've seen this consistent pattern, consistent kind of outcry that happens where even if it was another crisis or a failure or betrayal or something that sparked them coming here, what often comes forth at some point is how utterly lonely they are.
Hmm.
And I'd have to say that's not what I expected or was what I thought was at the core of why people are struggling. But we consistently hear how isolated, how lonely, how unattended, how little community, um, how few friendships, just this condition of just not having anyone really. And if they're married, maybe their spouse, but even then, there's lots of situations where there's not even genuine companionship and togetherness there. And so this kind of actually like my polarization work, it came out of suddenly seeing this and thinking, I don't know if I'm equipped to know to what's going on here, what's underneath this, or how do we move forward? So it just pushed us to start researching and exploring why there's so much loneliness. I do think that we are in an epidemic of loneliness. I think there's a multiple factors that are contributing to why that why we're there, and specifically why men and then women are experiencing loneliness in different ways. But I do think it's a crescendo of a few unique 21st century factors that are colliding in our right now. We're under the water. We're not even sure how to they're so new that I don't know if we're prepared for what it was going to create in us. And so some of it is I don't want to say it's all 21st century dynamics, but we've always, the human condition is always to move towards isolation and loneliness when our environment is complex or difficult. We don't know how to deal with it. So the best thing to do is to retreat into yourself. So that's always been there, but I just do think there's some technological factors, some things happening politically that start to contribute to making this become an epidemic. So that's where it comes from, is just hearing it over and over again.
Did you read the book Bowling Alone? I feel like that.
Yes.
That was 2000. That was right on the eve of the internet. And he was capturing that, but he was going off of like the move from the television, suburban flight, other things. Like he was really, I mean, massive book, but man, Robert Putnam, I think it was, sociologist.
I just reread that, Preston, because I read it so long ago that I don't think I really absorbed it and understood what he was really talking about. And I think possibly he was ahead of the curve.
So this isn't just like an internet. I feel like that was like a major, like we've been moving in a direction for the last 70 years. But I think, I mean, with the internet, social media, political polarization, all kinds of factors have just compounded it, right? In the last 20 years,
yeah, absolutely. 25 years. Yeah, the breakdown of whether this is good or bad, which is the institution of the church. Some people are celebrating that. Some people are trying to protect that. But there's fewer places of belonging in real time, in proximity. There's fewer and fewer places like that. And so that's contributing as well. Well, we can talk through some of the things that I think are contributing to it.
So what are you seeing it loneliness growing? It's last 5 to 10 years. Is that statistically like not even really up for grabs? I mean,
well, there's a great institute that's doing some research around loneliness. It's called the Loneliness Project, and you can Google it and check it out. But they've been cataloging loneliness for the last 10 years. And they look at geography and socio dynamics, race, gender. And they've been tracking this with like surveys and research. And whether they're authoritative or not, there is a spike happening in the last 5 years, actually. People responding, I think 67% of men say, I have no friends. Where just prior to that, it was more like 42%. Which is still even high, right? But there is more people saying, yes, I don't really have any close companions or friendship or community. So they've been tracking that, and that's helped me kind of realize this is not anecdotal. There's actually so loneliness is actually going up in all the demographics. Men have the highest surge, and there's some research around why men are feeling more lonely. It's not even just feeling. Some of the research is they're literally lonely. There's nobody near them.
It's not just a feeling. You can measure this objectively by just looking at the kinds. When's the last time you had a conversation with someone in person for 30 minutes or more in the last week? And when that hasn't happened, or the last month or the last year, I mean, it's amazing how very few people are having intimate conversations outside of online. And this is actually some of what is messing with our neurological pathways of like whether we're connected or not. There's something that happens interpersonally when I'm able to be myself with someone else and talk about my current condition in life and be heard, that is going the way of the buffalo. It's just less and less people have that. And they're finding it in other places that are not meeting that loneliness. So Sherry if you are familiar with Sherry Turkle's work at all, but she says you can spend, she's not saying she's actually researched this.
you spend 3 hours of time on social media. They did brain scans that prior to that and then post to spending those 3 hours on social media, your brain starts to cocoon. If you've heard of that term, it's the prefrontal cortex. It starts to show signs of cocooning, which is closing in on itself, which is ultimately what happens when they do lobotomies on people who have committed suicide, is that their prefrontal cortex is completely cocooned, closed. And so this research is showing that your community connection that you think you have with 3 hours of time online is actually, your prefrontal cortex is actually showing signs of deeper depression, deeper closing in. That's what isolation, disconnectedness from your body. And I think that's a significant contributor. So when you ask most men or even women, like who are their influencers or who are they learning from, it's hardly ever someone that's in their active local life. And that feels empowering, but I think that the dark side of that is actually disconnection. Is there's just more and more ways that what is forming us is not in proximity to where we are. It's outside. And I think I really do. I think that's having an effect of anxiety and isolation and cocooning, as Sherry Turkle would say. Jonathan Haidt has done some work on this, mostly, if you're familiar with his, mostly on adolescents and children. The work hasn't been done yet on adults. Sherry Turkle's just starting to address it, but what is this detached or disembodied way of interacting? How is it changing our body and changing our mind? And loneliness seems to be like the best, at least the most simplistic or readily available term we have right now.
I'm thinking, as you're talking, it makes me think of an analogy, and I don't know, no analogy is perfect, but like if somebody just got all of their food and nutrition off of candy bars and soda, there's that temporary feeling of like, I feel satiated, I feel good, I enjoy this, I want more of it. I'm not just dropping over dead right away, but over time, your health is just deteriorating, right? I mean, is that kind of similar to?
Yes. Yeah. There's a feeling of fullness. Maybe that's what that metaphor is. There's a feeling of fullness, or there's an emotional return, or there's a dopamine. There's something you're receiving that seems to be getting you by, but is decaying you on the inside. And I don't hear, my frustration with this sometimes is I don't hear a lot of discernment around this drug that we call, the internet. So typically a conservative fundamentalist, firebrand would just say, it's all bad, stop watching movies, just this reaction to it. And then I think in many ways you just have a baptizing that, what can be wrong with it when it can push forward a good message. So we're not really, I just don't know if there's a lot of discipleship and development around how to engage these addictive things that are eroding us from the inside out. And every week, Preston, every single week, we have multiple people that come to the Kineo Center for deep work. Every single week, someone confesses when they're in a safe space. We're talking about 30, 40, 50-year-olds, confesses their addiction to social media.
Really?
And the shame and the guilt they feel, that it's disconnecting them from their kids. It's having impact on their marriage. It's making them angrier. It's giving them anxiety. They can't really, and they don't know how to, and it's the first time they're sharing that. And I think it's because there's not a lot of spaces for addressing our dependency on this thing.
When you say addiction to social media, are you talking specifically about things like political outrage porn, or is it just following influencers on TikTok that are just talking about like whatever. I mean,
Sure.
because as you're talking, I just my mind just goes to the political outrage stuff. It seems like that's what's sucking people in. But are you talking more broadly about like social media addiction? Or
yeah, absolutely. It's broader than that.
Okay.
Sherry Turkle, when her work, especially in reclaiming conversation, but I took a class with her and she kind of unpacked some of her research. It really is about volume. So it could be 3 hours of consuming cat videos.
Okay.
That begins to slowly close down your prefrontal cortex. It's really what it's doing is your head is somewhere else than your body is. If you can think about it as like and the effects of that over time. And so obviously it gets worse the more that you're consuming things that are like anger inducing, anxious, voyeurism, things that are like certainly exposing your being to more visceral things. It gets worse, but it's really not just about political things. It's really just scrolling or consuming in volume the things that you're detached from, and your body is not. I think this is testament to the way God has designed us, our Imago Dei. We're embodied beings with mind, soul, and heart and body. We're not intended to live divorced from that or disconnected from that. So, ironically, the 3 hours a day that she researched, the average person spends 6 to 8 hours a day. So she was just researching the minimal, but most people are spending a quarter to 30% of their day somewhere else other than where their body is. And that just starts to erode. I think this is, it's hard to critique this because it seems like it's accelerated connection. It's accelerated. It's knitting us together. We're meeting people we've never met. It's bringing people who lived in different places together. I mean, it seems like it's offered a lot of possibility, but I'm not sure we've explored the shadow side of that strong tool.
What's the answer? I mean, is it just all right? Stop it.
Yeah, I think it's moderation. I think that's one aspect is moderation, a discipline of moderation. I mean, I love a good Woodford Reserve. I love to sip a good whiskey.
Yeah.
But
Delta serves Woodford on their flights.
Man.
Yeah.
Do they?
Yeah. That's why I fly Delta.
Yeah, I'm a sucker for Woodford, but I just know that I cannot drink. I need to hydrate. So if I drink that after every meal, I'm just a mess. I'm sick. I'm a mess. So it's a pretty basic concept, moderation. We know this in other areas of our life. When it comes to this, that we just have a hard time with that. I think so. Moderation is one. I also think it's a sense of. I think that our delusions around what we think we're accomplishing with that medium. We need some humility there. So, I wrote about this in Level of Fear a little bit, but we really do think that we're changing people's opinion or being informed by more consumption.
Yeah.
That has become a truth in our society. If you're not informed, you need to Google it, scroll, find the news that no one else is finding. Like this, that's just become a truth. I mean, try debating that with somebody, and they're just, it's just rooting so much in us. As well as the second is delusion, is that we think we are changing people by crafting pontifications online. Like this power to change has become delusional, and so that those two things actually change our relationship and our being with them. So I just don't. Yeah, I don't see a lot of like, and I'm not anti because I have a social media feed and I'll look at the news online. I don't know if there's a lot of discernment about our about what we think, what capacities, what our
Mm-hmm.
locus of control is
Yeah.
with these things that we have. Well, I mean, Wendell Berry has been talking, is talking about this before the internet ever
Yeah.
came around, just about how our technologies um, form us more than we form them. And
Mm.
so some of that's at play a little bit is how neutral we think the technology is. If I put good messages out there, then I'm engaging the technology well. But the
Mm-hmm.
technology itself is malforming. It forms me for thinking that my community is someone who's not in proximity with me. That the more that we believe that because of our technologies telling us that, the more that we enter into loneliness. So it's got all these backhanded or shadow sides that need to be discerned. Um, for men specifically, some of the research around that, and some of what we're noticing is that um, the more men spend time, and this is not a pot shot at you, Preston, but consuming media. All their influences are podcasts.
Yeah.
All their learning is YouTube. They've attached to 3 or 4 influencers that they really look up to. A lot of their social engagement starts to happen on social media, and their nourishment is scrolling. When you put all this stuff together,
Mm-hmm.
um, you have uh, the ability to emotionally connect starts to plummet. Um,
Mm.
and what I mean by that is like that neuron. Think about it as if you have a neuron that you stop using, it starts to close up. I mean, this is what we know about neuroplasticity. It starts to
Yeah.
actually get smaller, right? And if we work this other neuron, which is all connection, all consumption, all
Mm.
sense of learning is happening. We build this 4-lane highway neuron, and all our cars just effortlessly go down there. Anxiety starts to kick in when we have to use this other neuron.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean by that? Like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it feels very unfamiliar. It feels anxiety inducing. I don't know how to connect and bond and attach. I don't know how to be vulnerable. So we're finding a lot of men are losing, and maybe they never had it, but the ability to be emotionally attentive
Hmm.
to the people around them. That's really difficult. It's almost like they're regret. Well, Carl Jung would say they're regressing. They're going backwards
Mm.
emotionally into adolescence and childhood. Um, and a lot of it is just because they have stopped developing in that area
Mm-hmm. Mm.
of being able to be a listener and
Yeah.
being able to be ask curious questions. All the
Mm.
things that are required to have an emotional attachment are we're
Yeah.
regressing in, and
Would
I
it
see
would it
this a
be
lot with men.
would it be fair to say there's a whole we're there's a spectrum of
Mm,
super dangerous and toxic to mostly helpful with some danger. And this is not a justification of my
hmm
podcast. Let me pre-up that right now. I'm constantly asking,
No,
is
it's all right.
this even good? Like, is this, I often think of it like how podcasts can sometimes replace like the church in a sense,
Sure.
people not finding meaning at their church. Maybe their church is just kind of boring and dry, and then they can go on a podcast
Yeah.
and get a really engaging,
Yeah.
honest conversation. And I
Right.
don't know what to do with that, but I mean, on the one end of the spectrum, you have, just scrolling cat videos or even worse, maybe porn or
Sure.
little less. Maybe you're informed, you're watching the news, but you're just watching the news, you're just constantly clicking and scrolling and you're just getting more anxious, more angry because you're
Yeah.
just being spoon fed, a certain perspective designed to make you angry and suck you in and
Yeah.
purchase stuff from their ads. So that, it's the whole industrial complex there is its own thing, all the way to what
Mm-hmm.
if you listen to like a long form, honest, non anxiety producing, 2 to 3 hour
Mm-hmm.
long form podcast conversation, that's
Yeah.
actually giving you healthy doses and
Yes.
information challenge. Like that to me seems like that could still be problematic, but that's way more
Sure.
healthy than the stuff on the other end of the spectrum. Is that fair
Yeah.
to say? Or
So you're wondering if there's like a spectrum
yeah,
of really, really unhealthy
yeah,
engagements with it to more healthy. I that's why I say moderation, and is that it's not an evil. It doesn't fit in the binary category of this is evil, this is good. It fits into the category of wisdom for me, and so
hmm
I'm careful myself. I'm careful with how much how much consumption I have, even around good things. But
okay,
it's not either or. So I mean, I've got a preacher I listen to, um, but I temper that because I know I do not want to begin to believe he's my pastor,
hmm
and the distance between his content and my incarnation is
mm,
massive.
okay,
It's huge. But I can actually start to trick myself into believing I am what I consume. The information that I take in means I'm changing.
hmm
And that's what creates that disembodiment. So I'm just careful about consumption. I mean, I have a couple podcasts I listen to, but I actually have a little tool on my phone about how much I can eat.
oh wow,
Um, So, the same way right now, my wife is like, "Hey, how many Woodford Reserves have you had this week?" You're like, are you having a whiskey every night? Is that your new pattern? Because that if
hmm right,
that creates more inflammation, and then you start complaining that your knee aches. I know that I can easily get into a pattern of just thinking it's all right to drink every night.
hmm
Not no judgment on people
right,
who think they can, but my body can't take that.
right,
I
yeah,
can do it in moderation. So. I think there's some healthy things to consume, but I also think I just think we have to discern how much we can
hmm
imbibe and take
hmm
in. I like to talk about the new hypocrisy. I don't know if you heard me talk about that, but
yeah,
hypocrisy in conservative fundamentalism would be preaching about something and not doing it. Preaching against adultery while the preacher is actually sleeping with a secretary. Like this
mhm,
obvious hypocrisy between teaching and practice. And my understanding of hypocrisy is that whenever we have a platform that's disconnected from our actual life, that is the sliver of where hypocrisy can start to fester and grow. And so the I can start to believe that because I'm consuming information, I am that what I consume.
hmm
Rene Descartes, talks about I think therefore I am. I think the new is I am that what I'm consuming, and so I start to
hmm
think, oh yeah, I am holier, or I am more loving. I am more
mm,
because I'm consuming loving things that talk about love. Or I'm now truth is important. And I think information is essential to formation, but
hmm
what's happening because of the acceleration of our technology is we're not getting to the incarnation part. We're like stopping short at information consumption.
hmm
Um, and so I think there has to be some questioning of like, where does hypocrisy grow? It's not just in these grotesque factors. It's wherever we're not embodying that what we're consuming.
Hey friends, if Theology in Raw has blessed or challenged you in any way, would you consider supporting the show through Patreon at patreon.com/Theology in the Raw? We are actually revamping our bonus material that Patreon supporters get. So we are going to 2 bonus Q&As per month for all the different paid levels. Silver level gets access to ask questions for the Q&A episode, and also you will get access to Exiles and Babylon archived content, which will be releasing different videos every month. Also, access to bonus research episodes that I'm gonna record from time to time. access to rough drafts of certain things I'm working on, which is a little scary for me to let people look into that because it's a rough draft. Gold and Gold Plus members get, we have monthly Zoom chats and all the other perks that the other tiers get access to as well. So again, if you want to support the show, it really, really does help us to flourish as a ministry. Again, patreon.com/theology into raw. I will see you in the community. I wonder how it affects or plays against doing patient, deep work, more long-term thinking, because people that just consume all their information from headlines or online stuff, it's so soundbitey and quick and brief, and people don't do the deep work of actually thinking something. And this plays into the mind virus that's affected our political landscape on all sides. And I do want to get into this because I think it's a huge problem. But for example, let me give an example. At the time of this recording, this will probably come out a few weeks after we record it. But at the time of the recording, a few days ago, there was this meeting that President Trump had with President Zelensky. Did you see the clips of this online or?
I didn't see the clips, but I've seen the reaction.
It's pretty pervasive.
Reactions.
Yeah, pretty pervasive. And depending on what quote unquote side you're on, that determines how you interpret it. If you're pro-Trump, you interpret it very positively. If you're anti-Trump, you interpret it very negatively. It's just, but here's to my point.
Right.
All you see online, for the most part, is this 4-minute, very heated exchange. JD Vance jumping in, cutting off Zelensky, and then Zelensky's cutting off. Like they're all kind of cutting off each other, and it's very heated. One of the more angry, frustrated times I've ever seen Trump usually, because he's pretty much a narcissist and likes to control the situation, and he typically gives an air of being in control. This time he kind of almost lost it at the end, and people lost their minds all across the spectrum. Most people don't even know that meeting was a 49-minute meeting. It's all recorded. Oh, wow. And for the first 44 minutes, I didn't know JD Vance was there. Like, it wasn't even like he was just sitting, didn't say a word. Nobody did. It was very cordial. It was very, very gracious. All that to say, like, I don't even like the soundbite, the quick, the clip, the 4-minute clip, that fed to you from one side of the aisle that's saying, see, look how horrible, see, look how, and it's like, but few people I think even know it was a 49-minute meeting that was, for the most part, very unlike the last few minutes. I think that, I don't know, when we're just pre-programmed to latch on to the thing that confirms what we already feel, and it just sends us down this spiral of anxiety and anger and tribalism, and on it goes. It's just rather than saying, you know what, I'm going to spend the next 4 weeks at the library researching from historians and experts in foreign policy the layers and layers and layers that lie, the history behind U.S.-Ukraine relations, and who is Zelensky and who is Trump. Like, it just, I don't know.
Yes. I'm with you.
It fosters that shallow thinking. So
it does. Yeah. Well, that's because there's such a quickness between the consumption of that information and then our response. It's just so the speed is so short. So when you see something that pisses you off, it does. I mean, it's like milliseconds, and you can express that opinion quickly. There's no mechanism for slowing down, for moving out of lizard brain, moving out of us versus them, and actually crock potting, instead of microwaving. That's what the technology. That's what I was saying earlier. Is the technology malforms us because, we all have opinions, and we all see something on the news, but it's moved to microwave. It's like it's cooked fast, and and that's why I'm often disappointed, even in some of my own close friends who have an irate opinion in milliseconds about something that just was posted, 2 hours earlier. I'm like, how did you become an expert on foreign policy already? Like what?
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean you can't have an opinion, but the zealotry of that response is the react. We're reactive rather than reflective. And that's what you're talking about, is going to the library, kind of like just a more marinating posture in discerning what we're learning and what we're seeing and what the history of something is, rather than within quickly can get a dopamine hit. And I know people hearing this are probably going to automatically say, well, that's because you're on the conservative side or this side. It's this condition is not partisan. It's like just it's moved beyond party lines, just in the way that we're fiercely reactive, and then move towards hubris and arrogance with our opinion. I think that's why it's getting harder and harder to. This is back to loneliness. Have you heard of this term called political siloing?
Yeah. Yeah, but unpack it. Unpack it for us.
Yeah, it is. There's been a couple times in history where this has happened, but it's happening right now. Is that political siloing is the psychological belief that I can only be safe with people who think just like me politically. So I can only, and so we're seeing this in church, like political siloing in church. I got to go to a church that's conservative. Progressives got to be with progressives. The purpling is intolerable for most people, and it's really because we're being shaped so much by the visceral reaction. I call it the verbal grenade tossing that's happening back and forth. We can't relax with people who think and feel differently than we do. We literally cannot enjoy the company of someone who believes differently about something politically. And so political siloing is really just this siloing isolation that's happening. Now, when you think about it, if I can't find someone who believes that the border should be dealt with exactly the way that I think it should be dealt with, then I've got nobody around me I can hang out with. Like I don't. And this is happening practically. It's just this splitting away from one another, and people leaving churches and communities and YMCA groups, and like any place where they felt belonging, they're separating because of these nuanced understandings of not always what they believe, but the how of their belief, of how something should be done. Sure, we've got a national deficit, but this is the way it should be addressed. The how. I can't enjoy company with Preston if you think differently than I do. I feel unsafe next to you. Yeah, and so therefore I lost a friend. And that's one less friend in my life. And so that's why people are moving more towards online community, what they're calling community or connection, because you can self-select and curate and piece together your own likeness online. And that the downside again of that is depression and isolation.
And you see this on both sides. This isn't.
Yes.
This is what I love about you. Like you. We've been talking offline. I've heard you say this before. That like how'd you say it? Fundamentalism is not it's an attitude, or
it's not what you believe. It's how you hold your beliefs.
Right. Yeah. And you see it on both sides of this political division.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we were talking about this a little bit earlier, but like some people don't enjoy his work, but Carl Jung, psychologist Carl Jung, who's kind of got a popular interpretation, but some of his deep work was talking about polarization. And early on, back in the 40s and 50s, he was talking about when we have the polarized mind, and we think we start moving towards a tribal condition with each other, that I am against you and you are against me. And that's very primal. and it happens so quickly and so effortlessly. Just I start to define myself over and against you. And he said, ultimately, that's what fundamentalism is. And he was exploring that fundamentalism wasn't a new phenomenon of, what we know in evangelical fundamentalism. It's actually a way you start holding the things you believe. And they become these weapons of, injury and arrogance and judgment and shaming. And so that's why you can look at both progressives and conservatives and see the tactics of shaming and policing and outcasting and name calling. I mean, all like they just really look the same. That doesn't mean there's an equivalence in the same equivalence in their belief systems, but in the way they hold their beliefs, they are almost identical. So that, I mean, and that's where we are right now. And I don't know a lot of people that are discerning the way that we're mirroring the very things that we hate. This is a little bit of Rene Girard, if you're familiar with Rene Girard, and just that imitative quality. Well, Carl Jung says this: the more that we behold that which we hate, we become what we hate. The more that we're like consumed by it, and that if he knew that we would have a social media feed that would just be like we could drink from that fire hose all day long, it actually makes us. It controls us, and we become the fundamentalist as well. So, yeah.
Do you feel like you have kind of freed yourself from that? And if so, and obviously nobody has done it perfectly, but I think you've done it well. How are you able to not be sucked into these political tribes?
Yeah, that's a difficult question.
But was there ever a time when you were? And what changed?
Oh yeah.
If you were, yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I think I can see, especially early on, like probably 16, 17 years ago, where I was going through a deconstruction, if that would have been a term. I don't know if that's the correct term, but like more of a decluttering. I was kind of like, I was getting rid of some stuff, but I really wanted to hold on to some other stuff. And so I was in that space, and my pendulum swing was to turn my anger and bitterness and contempt and redirect it back towards that which I was leaving behind. And so,
like from a your swing was from a conservative environment to a
more progressive,
and like really anti kind of conservative. Yeah.
Oh,
I see that a lot. I see that a lot where people, where their critique of the right might be legit, but then they just are so consumed with that they're defining who they are as the foundation is. I'm not conservative. Whatever the conservatives do, I'm not that, and it becomes this really unhealthy foundation. I think
there is no foundation there. That's what.
Right.
Well, that was what happened for me. Was like I became anti. That's how I defined myself. I am anti. I am against. This is what I'm against. I was defining myself, emphatically, which is I'm defined by the negative. And I drew, honestly, Preston, I drew people around that negativity. I formed community and connection around what we hated together. And so that was, that's very real for me. Just that the journey from moving away from something that you feel hurt you or wasn't healthy. And in some ways, I got some moments of abuse that are in there for me. And my pendulum swing was to become like that which I hated. And so I use the same tools. I know how to judge people. I know how to be arrogant, intellectually arrogant. I know how to think I'm more enlightened than they are. I mean,
Mhm.
all the same things that were used from the stage, I was using now from a different platform. And ultimately, what it did was just hollowed us out. I mean, we cannibalized each other because we didn't really have anything. Although we would say we were all about Jesus, the, the 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 genuine temperature was that we were all about our
Mhm.
hatred
Mhm.
and our anger.
Yeah.
So there was a bit of there's a delusion there, right? And we and so I see that online, every day and I think I wonder too is that if that's that is part of the journey, that when you are leaving something behind to kind of overcorrect or overcompensate,
Mm.
if you're in a one ditch, or you're afraid of hitting the ditch on the left, you crank your car and move hard to the ditch on the right, and now you find yourself in another ditch. Now, this isn't like, to me, this isn't advocacy for being a moderate or a centrist.
No,
You
I
know,
don't like that either.
I don't
Yeah.
think, yeah, I don't
People
think that's
people
a
thinks that
holy
people thinks
posture.
that's what I advocate for, like a centrist. I'm
Right.
like, no, I'm not. It's almost like, are you on this side of the football field or this side of the football field? Oh, you're just on the 50-yard line. You can't just. I'm like, no, I'm playing baseball. I'm not even playing. Yeah,
We're playing a
yeah.
different,
We run
yeah,
too. We throw a ball too. We go to the gym too. But it's just a completely different playing field when
yes,
you're a Christian whose
yes,
membership is in
you got it.
the multi-ethnic global kingdom of God, which has an oppositional
Yes,
character built into it.
it does.
It doesn't,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
I, the part that was most, like shocking for me as someone who really wanted to follow Jesus was that for a good 3 to 4 years, I started to use Jesus for my political agenda.
hmm,
So I took the name of Jesus and started to filter Jesus through my political agenda rather than the other way around. And I thought I was better than the far right that did that pretty obviously and egregiously in some ways. The religious right. I mean, they they flew that banner without any embarrassment, and so I thought I was better than them. But really, what I was doing was I was doing the same thing. And I get this a lot. I don't know if you hear this, but like when I hear someone say Jesus is on the side of righteousness, I often think, oh, you must have conservative politics, right? Like I know
yeah,
I know code for that. I know what
yeah,
that is.
yeah.
And then when I hear people say, Jesus takes sides, I know what you mean by that. I know the
Hmm,
code is he's
hmm,
taking my progressive policy sides.
hmm,
Um, we're caught in this. There's only two options
hmm,
for engaging the brokenness in the world, and it's their side
hmm,
or my side. And so, and obviously Jesus is on my side. So I,
hmm,
I don't know if I'm above it now. I'm more attuned to the powers and principalities than I was before,
hmm,
of how tribal or us versus them or simplistic demonizing is actually a demonic tactic, to
hmm.
pit me against others, so that what's the scripture talks about this clearly. We don't fight flesh and blood,
Right.
but that's what's happening. Is like that's what
Hmm,
the powers of principalities want from us,
yeah.
is for us to hate and raka, as Matthew would say, raka, murder each other, right? And
Hmm,
speaking that way about one another. And so I think the way to this isn't like being so above the tree line that you're transcendent and you don't feel the things other people feel. But
right.
I do think you have to discern the work of the powers and principalities to pit us against the other, whoever the other is. That's what's happening in Romans and that's what Paul
Hmm,
is talking about, is like
hmm,
you're fighting each other, but it's not actually where the
right.
fight is.
Hmm.
So
Is it polarization getting worse, and why is that? Is it, or is this, does this go back to what we are talking about earlier about just being more and more living an online life, and the online life is designed to make you tribalistic and angry and uh, disembodied, and just does it seem like it's getting worse and worse?
I think it's worse. Are you familiar with VUCA? Have you heard of the term
Mm-mm.
VUCA? VUCA is, kind of an abbreviation for what some sociologists have discerned are like periods of time in history that are exceptionally
Mm.
precarious. So VUCA, V is volatility, U is uncertainty, C is chaos, and A is ambiguity. When these four forces come together, we we begin to move towards self-preservation, which is what fear is, right? It's we move into an extreme place of fear, and that's what polarization thrives on fear. I mean,
Mm.
it is the primary emotion of why Donald Trump would say, back in, when is it, when he first ran, the streets are running amok with rapists and thieves.
Right.
And Hillary Clinton said, they're coming for your bodies. They want to take your bodies. Like,
Mm-hmm.
she was talking about, abortion, and both of them using the language of fear to kind of catalyze their base.
Mm-hmm.
When we're not in fear, we don't polarize
Okay.
as intensely. We're not feeling like we have to preserve either our way of life or something that we think is going to be taken from us. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a few times in history, World War II, where you can see VUCA, and
Mm.
we're there right now. I mean, that's
Mm.
why. And then when you add in a layer of technology that accelerates that VUCA,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
volatility, uncertainty, chaos, ambiguity, you've got
Mm.
a cocktail of rage. Um, I think discernment is not. If you asked earlier, like, am I above it? I think it's more not. For my wife and I talk about this all the time. Is I don't want to be ensnared by that.
Mm-hmm.
And so discerning where you might be getting ensnared in the idolatry and the tricks of us versus them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's at a fever pitch right now. Absolutely.
I wonder if your social location. I mean, you've been in Puerto Rico for a few years now.
Sure.
Has that helped you? Uh,
Oh yeah.
yeah. I mean, when I was living in the
Absolutely.
UK, this is years ago, but I mean, and this is the internet was barely taken off at that time. But it just, I did remember moving back to the States and just,
Hmm.
golly, it just helped me to see. It's like when you're not in an environment for a while and you go back to it, like, oh my word, you can see it so
Right.
much more clearly. Because like in the UK,
Yeah.
you don't have a two-party system. You just the brand of evangelicalism in the UK is just it's just different. I would say much
Hmm.
healthier. It's not so
Yeah.
intertwined with politics. It's
Yeah.
way more great because it's a
Hmm.
the even the evangelical church of the UK lacks the kind of political power or potential
Yes.
political power. It's more like you're living you like it's much easier to separate your Christian citizenship
Yes.
from kind of everything else. And if you meet another
Right.
person of another denomination, they can be egalitarian, complementarian, they can vote this direction, whatever. It's just all that's just very secondary. It's like, oh, you believe in the gospel too. Awesome. Let's do ministry together.
Right.
And that sort of unity and identity, primary identity in the church. And I'm not saying it's perfect at
Yes.
all. I don't want to. But
Sure.
it was just way more healthier. Then came back here. I'm like, oh yeah, we fight over everything here and divide over everything. And
Right.
that was back in, I came
Right.
back in 2007. So this is like,
Oh wow.
this is pre
Yeah.
social media and everything. And it was a shock to the system then. And now it's just like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes.
So do you feel like living outside of the US context has been healthier for you spiritually?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean,
Sorry.
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and I know I probably have a level of embarrassment that detachment has been so helpful for my soul. Some would think it's privilege to be
Yeah.
outside of the context of war, culture war specifically. But yeah, I mean, the Puerto Rico is not infused with the steroids of
Hmm.
us against them. It's just not that really. They're very, very hyper local, like
Hmm.
to a point of like it's surprising how much of their sense of self definition, who they are, is really defined by how they know their neighbors, how
Wow.
how we are together, and so there's a real familial orientation um, that I think. Well, Tanya and I both really longed for. We were working for years in the states, which is countercultural in many ways, and here it's actually kind of part of the culture. So a lot of what's happening on the political, if you would say, not even political, what's happening on the, in the executive level around, who gets power, who gets to legislate, who doesn't get to legislate. They're not all that emotionally riled up by that. It's just not,
Hmm. Hmm.
it's secondary. Um, and there's something beautiful to that. That's how we've kind of entered into that flow here. It probably wouldn't be unless I had, if I did no social media, I probably wouldn't even be aware of what happened between Trump and the Ukrainian president. So there's a level of, and this, I guess maybe this gets at a little bit of like, is there a place for some level of healthy detachment?
Yeah.
I do think that there's a lot of anxiety that we cannot unplug. We cannot detach from it. It's intolerable. It's intolerable to not be in the know.
Hmm.
Um, and I see a lot of that like drama online of people just not feeling like they're entitled to unplug, detach,
Hmm.
put that in a container where it's not the center of their life.
Hmm.
Um, that doesn't mean I'm not political, right? To me, political is how you're engaging the kingdom of God in public. And
Yes. Yes.
Jesus was wildly political, but it's actually quite surprising if you do a lot of first century research of how almost scant communication Jesus did about what was happening on
Hmm.
a geopolitical level.
Well, and they tried to suck him into
Yeah,
the
they
political
did.
tribalism of the day.
Yes,
I mean, Sadducees and
yes,
Pharisees, they weren't just religious movements. They were
right.
intertwined with
Yes,
political stuff. I would compare it to kind of
yes,
a right wing Christianity, left wing Christianity that is
yep,
religious, but it's also very deeply partisan. And they tried
yes,
to suck him into it, and he kept pulling him out of that mindset.
yes,
It's a wonderful analogy, actually.
yeah,
How do you
yeah.
respond to the critique that only those who are privileged, who like me, a middle class white person living in Boise, Idaho, which has no crime, or somebody in Puerto Rico who, good for you, you can remove yourself from this, but there's people whose lives are at stake. Who there are people who will be harmed if and since Trump is in office, or there will be people who will be
Mm,
harmed if Kamala gets into office. Like that,
yeah.
they draw on that kind of height. Like people will die in the streets if you
Yeah.
don't care a little more. So yeah, you
Mm,
need to be looking at the news. You need to be doing this. You need to be tweeting and Facebooking and being an advocate because the lives of real people
yeah.
are at stake. How do you respond to
How do you respond to that, Preston?
that?
That's a
um, I think it's. I mean, honestly, the people who, well, I don't. I think there is a measure. There's a glimpse of truth there. I think.
mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm.
I just think it's not. You will be a very ineffective activist if you overconsume all of the problems in the world. I also do think that people who make this argument have bought into some of the propaganda on whatever side they're fighting for or against.
Yeah.
That because that's the message, right? If Trump gets into office, we're going to have people in death camps, and we're going to have all this horrible thing that's going to happen. And then they may even point out, like, look at the immigrant. You have these families being ripped apart, and people being sent back to their countries, and people are being harmed, and he took away all the USAID money, and now they're starving kids in the streets and everything. And then on the other side, it's like, no, because Trump's in office, we have all this corruption that this money was serving, is actually going away and being addressed. And you could just, it depends on what narrative you're going to choose to buy in. And every narrative is going to draw on truth. It's just like, but if all you do is hand select this, hand select this, hand select this, and leave this out, you can build a really compelling narrative on each side. I mean, if I were to bring a film crew to Puerto Rico and I just followed you around and only captured all of the really wicked things you have done and said, I could create Hitler out of Dan White Jr. without lying. Without lying. And then another film crew could follow you around and they can create a saint, like a Jesus-like person, because they just highlight all the good things you did. But that's what I see is going on both sides of the kind of political tribalism. And so when people buy into that narrative and they only follow that one side of the narrative, of course they're going to be like screaming and yelling and, for the sake of justice, we need to like do something here. But I just think there's a bit of propaganda that they're buying into. So
there is.
I don't know. I'm gonna get in trouble. I don't know how many people are like, amen, or like, how dare you?
I get. Yeah, I'm always careful with my response to that because it's not simplest. It's not simplistic. It's not
right.
If this person gets in power, all bad things are going to happen, or if that person gets in power, we know that it is way more nuanced and complicated than what is being sold to us on our feeds. I mean, you could just, one simple exploration into this is to look at, this is going to be a little touchy, but like, I think Trump has done some horrible things around immigration. But when you look at the record of Obama, there's been some horrible things he did around immigration.
Oh, for
that's
sure.
not the MO. You don't get that. You don't get those stats. That's not the talking points. But in his stay, there is record of some really, I think, hurtful things he did with immigration that look just like what Trump did. But so are they both bad? No. It's complicated. It's not one or the other. My ultimate response is that I think we've lost a significant sense of our agency in our local life. And I wrote a book about this, that a big part of our sense of power over things that we don't live in is why I really think that you ask your average person if they know the names of their neighbors, and they don't. We are not living politically locally. I just had a statement from my last book that came out last week that people were quite upset about. It's like you're trying to change the world online, but you're not engaged with your neighbor. To me, that's a massive. The teachers of the law, the Pharisees, did this, and the way that I deal with that is like, well, I'm engaging the actual common good where I live, and I don't feel like I have enough understanding to fix the common good somewhere else where I don't live. And so there's a little bit of like embracing your limits, but also embracing the power of your local roots. So I don't know. I told this.
Yeah.
I don't know if I told this story last time. This is real quick. I don't have time, but I was in the middle of my first book on. It's all about the neighborhood and I was meeting up with another author and I was in town for a conference and I was meeting up with them. And they happened to live in town where the conference was. And so I wanted some feedback on my book, and we were going to get together and they were going to give me some feedback. And so they invited me to go to their house. And we were going to sit down and have a cup of coffee at their house. And as we were walking, this person had written 3 fairly best-selling books on significant social justice issues, advocating for some real change. And as we were walking up to their apartment on the second floor, I said, "Hey, what's it like living here? Do you know your neighbors?" And their response was, "Oh, it's great. I don't know them. They don't know me. We don't even bother each other." And then I thought, how is that not the opposite of what you're writing about? Like, and that's because that chasm, that gap between our activism or how we think we're going to change the world and our local life, the ties are not there any longer. You know, you can advocate for a policy change, but literally believe it's a great thing that you don't know your neighbors, they don't know you, and you don't talk to each other is somehow good. And it was just my first encounter with like that uprooted way of engaging with change in the world. And I don't think I do it perfectly, but those disparities.
And that
I don't know if that.
I resonate with that. And it made me think of the brilliant title of Eugene Peterson's book, A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. If you just spend your justice online, going from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing to thing to thing, you will do way more good in the world if you pick a cause, 2 causes, and invest in those in an embodied, holistic way over a long period of time. Maybe you'll affect 3 or 4 people, 10 people, 20 people. You know, maybe the net results don't look big. Maybe you go on and tweet something angry about Trump and it gets retweeted and it feels good. Look how this impact I'm making. I'm just going to say that's like eating candy bars and soda. You know, it may feel good in a moment. You may think you're doing something, but if you just invest into something in an embodied long-term way, I think that's way more effective. And I do think the principalities and powers have if you think otherwise, I think they're distracting you and they're pulling your heart toward this cesspool of fake justice online, and you're not, and it's stealing your heart away to where you don't even know the people around you. And I'll be the first one to say I'm not immune to it, dude. It's compelling. It's super compelling to get online and do stuff that seems like you're changing the world, you know? I just do Eugene Peterson was living in a different world, but I mean, here's a guy who was absolutely brilliant, could have been a superstar, and he obviously, wrote a Bible, wrote lots of books and stuff. But I mean, he invested in a relatively smallish congregation, few hundred people for years and years, I just think if we had more of that, we'd be doing a much better job. I do have to close this out, man. We're just getting started, but I got another interview here coming up in a couple minutes. So, real quick, where can people find out more about your ministry? Because it's awesome. We've sent people there. We've sent several Theology Raw people there. Apparently, I didn't even know that. You told me that after last time you were on, you had some people that said, "Hey, I heard about you from Theology Raw." So tell us where they can find more about your ministry.
Yeah, the KineoCenter.com is a place to go, and that will take you into all kinds of pathways of renewal, healing, recovery, rest. No matter if you're working with people, you've probably got injuries and accumulated shame, anger, and fear that needs some healing. And so, there's the place to go, KineoCenter.com. Dan, thanks so much for being a guest on Theology Raw again, man. Many blessings on you, your family, and your ministry. I look forward to the next time.
This show is part of the Converge Podcast Network.